Like the great movie Chronicles of Narnia, Spiderwick Chronicles, and any other great chronicles you can think of, we can say that the AnIme Spirit Chronicles takes you on a decent adventure as it not only tells a good story, but engages you emotionally as well. Sit back and relax as we show you a glimpse of what this AnIme has to offer. The AnIme opens up to the childhood memory of our main character Haruto, who is seen promising a girl, Mai-chan, to marry her. As he ponders on this memory in a bus on his way to school, the bus is suddenly hit by a train, which crushes and kills the other passengers on the bus, including a small girl and her sister who sat just next to him. Waking up, Haruto sees himself in a wooden shack as a small tattered boy named Ryo. As he tries to recall memories of his now past self, he finds it hard to make sense of things as the more he tries to remember, the more he forgets and clings to his new personality. While he is still stuck on the thought, a group of guys who appear to be his friends enter the room. They go on to lay a sack on the ground which happens to be goods they were asked to transport. As they settle down to eat, Ryo's smell irritates them. So they urge him to have his bather. Ryo sheepishly obeys and goes to clean up. As he returns to the shed, he is surrounded by a group of ladies in cloaks. They are from the palace and in search of a girl. Seeing he is living in the slums, they go on to talk to him badly except for a girl who introduces herself as Celia and talks to him gently. He then goes on to tell her that he knows nothing of the girl or the kidnapping. Thanking him for his help, she gives him a pouch of silver, which he goes on to tie around his neck. Skipping back to the shed in joy, he opens the door where he's met with a knife to his chest. Luckily for him, the knife pierces where the pouch is, leaving him unharmed, but his coins are now scattered on the floor. He looks up to see a masked man who happens to be an assassin, as he had killed the other members of his crew. In a bid to survive, he tries to fight with this masked man, but as he strikes a pose, time is stopped and he sees a female spirit who tells him what to do to enhance his physical abilities using his innate magical powers. After the brief instruction, time is once again released and he takes on the assassin, with the knowledge of his life as Haruto and his newly boosted stamina. He then knocks out the assassin, and as he rises to leave, he hears a noise and sees movements from the sack that his crew laid down earlier. He goes on to open it and sees a girl inside, Princess Flora, who desperately asked for his help. Seeing it is the girl that he was asked about earlier, he then carries her on his back, and while he walks, he is sighted from afar by her search party. They quickly rush to him and begin to accuse him of kidnapping her, which he denies, but since they are royals, their words are superior to his. So they take him to the palace for questioning, or at least that's what they told him. In the palace, he is hung in a cell and beaten to confess to the kidnapping of the princess by the vice-captain of the Knights of the Royal Guard, Charles Arbor. Meanwhile, in the slums, troops are sent to the shed Ryo was in and they arrest the assassin. Shocked by the event of things, people gather in the shed, and among them is a cloaked man who employed the assassin. As the assassin awakens to talk, the cloaked man crushes a crystal which automatically kills the assassin. Back in the castle, Princess Flora awakens from her sleep and begins to look for her savior Ryo. She then sends Vanessa and Celia to bring him to her. On getting there, they see he's been battered and bruised. So Vanessa immediately orders his release, and Celia goes on to help Ryo, who angrily refuses her help before he faints. Later on, Ryo wakes up to see he is completely healed and is in a soft bed. Rather, that's the cell he fainted in. As he registers his surroundings, he sees Celia, who apologizes for their behavior towards him and tells him of the king's request to see him. Ryo, not knowing the etiquette to address the king, asked for her help. As the king, queen, and his daughters, Princesses Pristina and Flora, await his entry, Ryo enters the palace. Unlike before, his hair is trimmed and he is in good clothes. As he kneels before the king, the episode comes to an end. Later on, we see Celia inviting Ryo for private tutoring as he doesn't know how to read. She also advises him that his classmates might be rough on him because they're royals and he's a peasant, which Ryo understands already. Seeing his resolve, she welcomes him to school and goes on to introduce him to the class as a transfer student. And as you might have already guessed, some royals didn't take it lightly. The story of being awarded an enrollment into the school by the king has spread among the students, so they know he is from the slums. Prompted by his teacher Celia, he goes on to introduce himself to the class and asks them for their assistance wherever he may be lacking. Well, before he completes his statement, he is compared to a servant by one of the students. I guess we'll always have that one guy who is very condescending. As Ryo takes his seat, the class then kicks off as Celia teaches them arithmetics. After writing down some calculations on the board, she then walks up to Ryo to not push himself too hard, as it is only his first day of school. Of course, the class laughs at him for being stupid or not being able to read. After school hours, Rio decides to take Celia on her offer and goes to see her in her research lab where she is. As he knocks on the door, he is met by Celia, who has completely forgotten about their appointment. She then welcomes him to her research lab, which is completely scattered. Ashamed of this, she tries to make space in the room. As she is doing so, Rio sees big books on the shelves, which normally is above her grade as she is still small. He then goes on to ask her about the books, and that's when she reveals that even though she's 12 years old, she skipped grades and graduated from high school. After their short chat, she then gives him some practice questions which he goes on to excel in. This is because of his memory as Haruto, who was a university student, but when asked by Celia, he tells her it's because of his late mother. The next class is sword lessons, and while others have sparring partners, Rio is left to spar on his own. Seeing this, the teacher then calls on him to be his sparring partner. The whole class stares in awe as Rio skillfully spars with his teacher. This also is because of his memory from sparring lessons with his master back in his past life as Haruto. His teacher, seeing Rio's skill, urges him to be a knight, but Rio has other plans. The next day, they have a test, and unlike what some of his other classmates expect, Rio writes well. Soon, the results are out and Rio does well. Not just well, but is the second best in his class. Now they are more jealous of him, and among them is Alphonse Rodin, who accuses Rio of cheating. Thankfully, Celia breaks them up before it escalates into something more. After this poor show of character by Alphonse, Rio goes on to spend time with Celia in the research lab, as it has become kind of a safe space for him. They seem to be getting closer, as Celia shares her similar struggles with jealousy as a young genius in her class. Next, the students have an annual exhibition tournament with the knights. From the primary school section, Rio, as well as Alphonse and Stuart Huguenot, are chosen. As you might have expected, while the class is accepting of Alphonse and Stuart, they are not so pleased with Rio as a choice, and Alphonse makes this known to the teacher. The teacher, not minding whatever Alphonse had to say, tells him that his decision is final and no complaints will be entertained. Back at the research office, Celia explains to Rio that winning the tournament will help him to be scouted by knights, but Rio tells her that he plans to leave the country after he graduates. He goes on to tell her that the country is too hard for him to live in and that he has somewhere he wants to go. She tries to convince him to stay by offering him a position in the lab, but he declines, so she asks the place he wants to go. He then tells her about his parents' homeland, Yagumo. The reason for this journey is his memories of his mother telling him when he was younger that she'd take him there. He doesn't tell Celia this reason, though, when she asks. The tournament day has arrived, and for the first challengers, we have Rio versus. Stay tuned. As Rio makes his way to the battlefield, he's met by Alphonse, who as usual talks down on Rio, but he doesn't mind as he looks at Alphonse and keeps walking. As might have guessed, Rio's entry into the arena is met with silence, or so it would have been if not for Celia cheering wildly for him in the stands. It was just her, though, as she doesn't inspire the crowd to cheer. Unlike Rio, his opponent, Charles Arbor, yes, the one who beat up Rio earlier. After what he did to Rio last time, he was demoted. So now he is in the mood to pay back as he wears a sneaky smile on his face. Well, no need to bore you with how the swords moved and all, but we will tell you this: Rio won. And being the sore loser that he is, Charles tries to contest Rio's win by claiming he wasn't taking the fight seriously, but he's immediately dismissed. Even after his victory, Rio is barely celebrated, but Celia and his swords practice teacher happily clap for him in the stands. Later that evening, Charles is seen drinking with a cloaked man who at this point isn't wearing his cloak and is revealed to be the ambassador of the Empire. The ambassador then goes on to console Charles by telling him that he did a good job of letting Rio win, unlike the other knights who won the students. Drunk Charles, who has been looking for an excuse, gladly accepts the excuse as the reason why Rio won him. Returning to school the next day, Celia, who has a gift for Rio, sees him heading towards the side of the school, so she hides to watch him. She then sees Rio meet up with a girl who gives him a letter, tells him of how gallant he was in the tournament, and runs off. Celia, seeing this, now has watery eyes. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? Not right? Nah. Back at the research lab at night, Celia goes through the student's script where she sees that Rio writes nothing when asked about his plans after graduation. She then remembers Rio telling her of his plan to travel to his parents' homeland and is sad. The next day, Celia goes on to teach Rio and his classmates about magic, and of course, Alphonse and Stuart makes fun of Rio, saying that he has no magic. So Celia goes on to tell them to do a lighting trick, and she silences them when she shows them how premature their magic is. It sure pleases Rio, who smiles at her. After this, the class continues smoothly. After this class, they go for an outdoor practicum in the forest where their objective is to make it to a specific goal. This is to test the military exercises already being taught to students. With Alphonse being the team leader, he finds the shortest route to their destination with the help of Stewart, who asks his soldiers for help. As the team set to begin their adventure, Stewart orders Rio to carry everyone's luggage. Sheepishly, Rio does. Going into the forest, they first encounter goblins who, with the help of Alphonse's direction, the group defeat easily. As they advance in their journey, they reach a cliff where they encounter orcs. Unlike the goblins, these ones prove more difficult to beat as they struggle. Amidst the chaos, an orc injures Stewart, who then in pain hits Princess Flora, pushing her off the cliff. As she fell down the cliff, Rio, seeing her quickly, jumps off and using some magic pushes back to the top of the cliff where she lands safely. But as for him, he falls to the ground below. He doesn't die or get injured, as he balances himself in the air, making him have a soft landing. While he is at the other side down the cliff, his mates are still fighting the orcs. With Alphonse getting a hold of himself and analyzing the situation, they win the orcs. They then go to celebrate their victory, but their celebration is short-lived as they gather to find out who pushed Princess Flora. All attention is turned to Stewart being questioned about the incident. He immediately denies it. He goes on to admit that he was a victim of the push as well, and not knowing who to frame, he immediately pins it on Rio, who isn't even there. On hearing this, Princess Flora speaks up for Rio, saying that he saved her. Rio, who has found his way up the cliff and is in a ticket nearby, knows that no one would believe it, and indeed, no one did. As they decide to continue their journey, Flora calls to their attention that Rio is missing. They do not care and decide to put the quest first. And as Flora decides that she is going to look for Rio, they hear a larger roar. A bigger monster than all they'd faced appears from the forest in front of them. This monster was conjured by the ambassador, who had disguised himself with his cloak inside the forest. He did this to see Rio's abilities firsthand. Thinking it's like the other they'd creatures faced before, the students assume their battle positions to fight the monster, but alas, it is all to no avail. So like any of us will do, they all run away in different directions. Flora goes on to heal one of her teammates and is soon met by the monster standing behind her. As it makes its way to grab a hold of her, Rio jumps out of the bushes and slices its hand off. Happy to see Rio instructs her to leave the area while he continues fighting the monster. After the fight had dragged on for a while, Rio claimed the victory by taking its head off. While Princess Christina and her other classmates make their way to Princess Flora, Rio takes his leave as he runs in the opposite direction. Seeing the fight and Rio run away, the ambassador, who was leaving, is amazed by the sights of the fight and finds Rio worrisome. Back in the research lab, Rio walks in to tell Sully of his departure. He goes on to tell her that it's because of the false charges put on him that he has to leave earlier. She understands as she overheard Duke Huguenot's conversation planning to frame him. He also promises to write her letters using an alias Haruto. After bidding their goodbyes, Rio sets out and Celia cries as she flashes back to all their encounters so far, starting from when they met in the village. Later on, we see Duke Huguenot give a beast girl who was an assassin a piece of Rio's clothes as a means to track and kill him. We see Rio traveling on his journey, running at high speeds using magic arts. We then see him stop at a village where he goes to restock on supplies. As he enters the town, we see him closely followed by a short person in a cloak. It is the assassin. At this point, you'll realize that cloaks are a happening thing in this story. From time to time, we see Rio noticing the presence, but he never actually sees her. Going into the town, Rio sees a lot of food stalls and provisions all around, as the town is a bustling town. But what catches his attention is a soup-style pasta, which he finds surprising. The seller then goes on to tell him that a lady, Lislot in the town, is the one producing it. He also shows Rio where he can get some to buy. As he walks into the shop, he is escorted by two females. Among them is Lot, who takes a special liking to Rio. Not in a bad way. After his stay, they package his goods for him, help him send a letter to Celia, and he continues his journey. We then find out the Lot is Lady Lisloti, who for reasons we do not know yet hid her identity from Rio. As Rio continues his journey into the forest, he comes upon the assassin on the ground. Unknown to him about her identity, he tries to help her, and that's when she stabs him with a poison knife. As he struggles to find his footing, he begins to feel its effects, so he quickly heals it. After he heals himself, the fight begins, and as some of you may have already guessed, he wins. After he pins her down, she begins to cry for her mom. Quite uncharacteristic for an assassin, I'd say. Seeing she is beyond convincing to stop, Rio then uses magic to put her to sleep. As she sleeps, he removes all her weapons and lays them aside, including her cloak, which he also neatly folds. Something that catches his eye is a submission collar he sees on her neck, so using his magic he undoes the collar and frees her. Meanwhile, as she is dreaming, she replays the memory of her being on the bus that the train ran over and how she woke to be a slave and a beast person in this world. She dreams of how she woke up to be in chains held by Steward and how he kept on calling her Latifah, and when she corrected him that her name is Endosuzun, he yanked the chain harder and threw her on the floor. Not only that, he also forced her to call him her esteemed older brother, and when she didn't, he used magic to make the submission collar cause her extreme pain until she said it. On waking up, she sees Rio who reaches out to her, but out of fear, she tries to struggle her way free. Well, he tells her it's pointless as she is completely bound. So they come to an understanding. Well, not really an understanding because he kind of threatened her. But they come to an understanding when she sees that he freed her from the collar and through that sees that he's not a bad guy. So she complied and answered all his questions. This is when she tells him that the Huguenot family sent her after him to kill him. After the questioning, he frees her to go while he continues on his journey. Seeing as she has nowhere to go, she offers to follow him. After consideration, he then agrees for her to travel with him to the village of the Beast People. So they travel together. After many days of traveling, and amongst other food they had eaten, Rio finally makes pasta, which Latifah immediately recognizes as spaghetti. At first, Rio is surprised and begins guessing if she's from Earth as well, but soon he brushes it off aside. His thoughts are confirmed when she starts crying in her sleep about wanting to leaving this world and returning to Tokyo. On waking in the next morning, they continue their journey, and soon after traveling in forests, deserts, volcanoes, and ice, they come upon a big tree, where they take camp for some time. Like the other night, Latifah has bad dreams. On seeing this, Rio then uses magic to help her sleep well. After he does this, he glows outside to see a large wolf, which immediately transforms into a very bright light that blinds Rio into a beast people. On seeing his camp in their territory, are furious. Things get worse when they see that there's a beast person in his hut and she is even under the influence of sleep magic. Not giving Rio a chance to explain, they attack him, and since his sight isn't still good, they knock him out unconscious. I guess it's the word of the sleeping girl to rescue Rio once more. While unconscious, he sees the spirit we saw in episode 1 once more, and they converse once more, leading to his wake. As he wakes up, he sees he's on a bed and in chains with beast girls beside him. Shortly after, Latifah bursts into the room and jumps on him as she starts crying. Soon an elder among the beast people comes into the room they're in and inquires about Latifah from Rio. She also, alongside the other beast girls that captured him, apologizes to him. They take off the chains and prepare the room well for the night. The next day, he is led to have an audience with the Council of Elders. The Council of Elders consists of an elderly elf, Sildora, an elderly dwarf, Dominic, and an elderly beast lady which we have seen earlier, Ursula. After the introductions have been concluded, they apologize for the way he was treated and offer their thanks for saving Latifah from slavery. In a bid to show their gratitude, they allow Rio to stay in the village and also help train him in the spirit arts. Just as the meeting comes to its conclusion, a magic spirit, Dryas, appears. She is the spirit of the Great World Tree which led Rio to the village. She immediately realizes a spirit resting within Rio. On receiving consent from Rio, she places her hands on the sides of his head and draws her head closer to his. Not a kiss though, even though that's where it looks like it is heading. She then looks into him and sees his high amount of magic power, which she compliments. Soon she stops, and by her countenance, Rio knows she sees something strange in him. He goes on to ask her about it, and she tells him that she sees a spirit sleeping within him. Not only that, but that the spirit within him is a human-shaped spirit, which is rare. Now you'd think that's all, but it isn't. She also goes further to tell him that she's in the class of the second highest spirits, but the spirit within him is a first-class spirit among which there are only 6 of them, and they went missing during the Divine Demon War thousands of years ago. Not what you were expecting, right? Yes, same goes for the elders who are stunned when looking at Rio. I guess he could become more special after all. So the elders decide to treat him more special. They consider honoring him as a saint. They give him a bigger house where he is accompanied by 4 other beast girls, including Latifah, of course, who's now tied to his hip. Figuratively, not literally, guys. So that's how he stays in the village, living with them, learning magic under them, and adapting to their way of life. A year later, the village celebrates the Great Spirit Festival in happiness and joy. Meanwhile, somewhere else on the continent, we see the ambassador again with a new goon, this time flying on a griffin into a cave where they go to steal an egg. As they fly away with the egg, and our episode comes to an end, we see them chased by a horde of creatures which we would find out to be called wyverns, simply dragon-like creatures. This brings us to the finale of this video. On the last day of the Spirit Festival, Rio and Latifah are both sworn into the village. Rio is a friend of the village and Latifah is a resident of the village. As they climb the stairs, Lady Dryas awaits them at the top, whose kiss is to swear them in. Kiss on the head, just so we're clear. She then goes on to kiss Rio on the forehead, swearing him in, and Latifah on the forehead, swearing her in. At the end of the short ceremony, they begin feasting. While the festivities go on, Rio tells Ursula that he intends to tell Latifah of his departure from the village and how he intends to leave her behind. On the other side of the forest, we see the ambassador and his accomplice camping on a spot for the night. He then tells his accomplice that he's going out to scout the area, so he gives him a red artifact for him to swallow. He explains it is for him to locate him in case of any trouble. Mind you, he's leaving the accomplice with the stolen egg, so trouble is bound to happen. Flying above the trees, he sees the wyverns coming and, as you might have guessed, flies away, leaving his accomplice to his fate. Back to the other side of the forest, we see Rio and Latifah take a walk. I guess he's about to lay the news on her. After talking about her, she loves the village and so on, Rio tells Latifah of his departure. She then stands in silence and asks to follow him, but he doesn't agree. He tries explaining the dangers of charting an unknown territory and that he can't protect her at the same time. But it's of no use. She wants to follow him. In sadness, she runs off deeper into the forest. Rio then tries to give her some space by waking away from her. As this is going on, the Council of Elders and some warriors talk about the wyverns approaching as they have confirmed the impact on the barrier. So they set out to make preparations. Back at the cave, yes, the cave, we see the ambassador stealing more eggs now that all the wyverns are out chasing their egg. I'm not a fan of Eagle, but you've got to hand it to him for such a plan. And this time, he doesn't carry the eggs on his shoulder or anything like that. Instead, he teleports them, a clean theft. As the warriors of the village scout around the forest, they see the ambassador's accomplice who, upon peaceful confrontation, makes a run for it. As he does, he's met by a black wyvern who tries to take him out. He continues flying, and the ambassador, who has no use for him any longer, crushes the crystal just like he did for the assassin in episode 1, killing him. Seeing the situation of things, the warriors try to combat the wyverns and send word to the village. While all these are happening, Latifah is seen in the forest, still stuck in her conversation with Rio. As she keeps on replaying the conversation in her head, she sees a body dropping, and as she goes to look, she sees he is dead. It's the accomplice. Moving on to the egg, which is now broken, she leans in to see what creature. As she does, the black wyvern lands close to her, and seeing the egg is broken, it is very furious. Returning to the village, Rio sees the whole place is rowdy as everyone is running for their lives. On inquiry from Dominic, he finds out that there is a flight of wyverns above close to the village. Soon he remembers that Latifah is all alone, so he rushes to her. Coming back to Latifah, she is attacked by the wyvern, who swings an arm at her and misses, but the force pushes her to hit her back into a tree. As the wyvern gathers its fire to finish her off, she is rescued by one of the warriors who come to her aid. After fighting the wyvern for a while, even the warrior can't defeat it and is overpowered. In a bid to lead the wyvern away from the village, Latifah tries leading it to chase her. Not a very smart move, I'd say, though. After being cornered by the wyvern, Rio is just in time to rescue her by hitting the wyvern with an ice lance. Now the wyvern's super pissed and takes back to the sky again, flapping its wings greatly. As Rio sets Latifah down in a safe area, he flies and gives the wyvern a little uppercut. His abilities are boosted by magic at this point, that's why it's possible. So back to the story, he gives the wyvern an uppercut, kicks it in the neck, and blows it to the ground. Well, long story short, he defeats the wyvern with his bare hands, I must add, and magic too. Seeing this wyvern defeated, the other wyverns then retreat home in fear. The next day, Latifah tells Rio that she understands that he has to leave. She also tells him about how she's a human who got reincarnated as a beast person. He also tells her his story too. Not to bore you with all that, as he set out to leave the village, the Council of Elders gave him gifts for his journey, and he begins his journey, leaving Latifah in tears. What will he encounter on his journey? What will the ambassador use these wyvern eggs for? Will the spirit within him awaken? Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video and would like to make the second part of this anime, kindly like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Till next time, guys.